This episode of the Sixth Sense Report contains some language, graphic descriptions, and may not be suitable for young children. Listener discretion is advised.
If you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. If you do read it, you're misinformed. What is the long-term effect of too much information?
Information, I just need some information. I've been dying. Is it lack of education? I've been reading without any transformation. I'm addicted. Is it overstimulation? Hey.
Welcome to the Sixth Sense Report.
Hear ye, come one, come all. You are listening to the Sixth Sense Report with Joel Nikoloff and Darnell Samuels.
Man, I feel like this is probably the longest coming interview we've had. Now that might not make sense to Darnell totally, but or I should say,
but to you,
yes, but to me and Liam have been going back and forth talking about potential episodes for a little while. So thank you, Liam, for joining us.
Yeah, stoked to hop on here. I think we should just start by acknowledging that I'm taping this from the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat. I would just like to state my pronouns are King in Your Majesty. Yeah, after that, pretty much good to go.
Okay, so so for our listeners,
sorry, I had to troll a bit.
Yeah, and the listeners hopefully can tell why I wanted to bring him on with that expert trolling to start.
Okay, so Liam, for those listeners who don't know you, can you give us a background on yourself?
Yeah. Going into the pandemic, I was doing music. So I went to school for audio engineering, music production, and
cool.
And then music business as well. And then, so going into lockdowns, my bandmate and I, we were like a duo. We had just played our first headlining show in February of 2022, and
2020.
and a month. Or sorry, 2020. Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
And then about 3 weeks later was when the pandemic crash hit, and then we stuck it out for till the second lockdowns, which came in December of 2020. And then once that happened, both of us were kind of like, all right, we're packing it in here.
Yeah.
Don't think the music industry is going to bounce back anytime soon. I'm not willing to put 20, 30 hours into promoting myself to stay relevant in the music industry to try to, hopefully make it out on the other end. Okay. And then so decided my bandmate packed up, moved up north. I decided I was going to get into videography stuff and just decided I would, instead of, I need a creative outlet. I'll go nuts if I don't have a creative outlet. So I was like, okay, I'm going to just do marketing videos for Instagram for small businesses, ads, restaurants, whatever. Worked with a few liquor companies and stuff like that as well. And then I randomly one day just made a video going into I think it was about a month or two into those second lockdowns. I just randomly made a video and titled it just like a message to my friends, and was just talking about mental health during the pandemic. And kind of at this time, the conversation around lockdowns was very similar to the conversation around vaccines about 3 months ago. I mean, now you can kind of talk about them pretty openly, not being what we were sold, but without too much pushback. But that this was back in the days of lockdown conversations just being as were just as vitriolic as the vaccine conversations were for a bit there. And yeah, I just talked about mental health and kind of both sides. I got a lot of messages from people that I'd see on shaming anybody who had anything negative to say about public health measures. They messaged me and they were like, you nailed this on the head. And then I had people on the that I'd seen posting that they were at anti-lockdown protests, that kind of stuff, and they were messaging me as well and saying, hey, you nailed this. And I was kind of like, all right, I'm seeing something here then. Right away, like I literally titled the video a message to my friends. I thought it was just going to be to my friends, and it instantly kind of blew up. I think that was still like the longest, the most watched like long form video I've done. Yeah, so and then just from there I was like, all right, cool. I guess if this is something that people like to hear and also like kind of feel like maybe somebody's out there having their back on the stuff that they're not hearing coming from their public servants and their media, then yeah, maybe just keep up with it. And since then, I started doing some fundraisers for people that were in need throughout the pandemic. Anybody that was kind of struggling, we did one for some raising for families in need that were struggling to buy groceries and stuff. We did a month-long fundraiser for them through my page. We did one for a buddy of mine that lost his eye doing construction and got put out of work for about 4 months, and seeing as he was self-employed, he wasn't eligible for any support for COVID support wise. And
You mean government programs aren't perfect?
Yeah. They kind of leave out anyone that doesn't hang on to their coattails. Anyone who thinks they can do it without, live life without the government, they pretty much cut them out of any of that stuff, which is pretty nuts. But and then it's just been finding it since then. This is it's the weirdest thing. It's never something I really planned on doing per se. It was kind of just, all right, people are listening, people are reacting, then there must be something there. And I've kind of just realized that I think what it is that, by nature, whatever is scarce is valuable. And I don't think there's a more scarce resource on this planet right now than truth. And so I think anybody who's talking about truth is just going to inherently see the value from that. And I have been in that sense of just not really filtering what I think. I don't really get into the science talk about stuff, because as much as I hate the notion that anyone without authority can't talk on those subjects, I am just I'm probably being more effective just talking about the culture around it all, the psychological aspects. That's something I've paid a lot of attention to and read, and I've been fascinated by ever since in my early 20s, was just fascinated with psychology. So yeah, that's kind of where I stick to, and talking from that lens. But yeah, no, I think I was very surprised too, as long as you don't I think anybody who gets insane negative backlash from speaking their opinions is probably doing it in a way that they're kind of asking for it. And I was surprised, because I had this notion getting into it and getting into the public commentary kind of thing, and thinking, okay, I'm just going to get attacked left, right, and center. And man, the vast majority of interactions are insanely positive. So yeah, no, it's been cool. It's been an adventure for sure.
Yeah, it's amazing that we live in a time where we're all connected through the internet, and you post something and then it goes viral relatively, and it's almost I don't know, you have a responsibility to keep to ride that wave and keep it going. And I think our listeners, everybody knows what I'm talking about. Whatever it is, you post a video on you baking a cake, and then it blows up, and then you're like, okay, I need to make more cakes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, legit though. But too, I think also I think authenticity is what makes things viral in a sense.
Yes.
You can get your cheap hits essentially, and do the mind games on reels and stuff like that, and in kind of back end hack virality, but that never really lasts, because you might have a video or two that goes viral taking that strategy of manipulating what you're putting out there. But I mean, how long can you keep that up for? It's usually about 2 or 3 months goes by where people start realizing maybe you're not that great at making cakes, if that's not something you're actually passionate about. Right. So yeah, I think yeah, authenticity and truth, those two things are just so rare these days that yeah, anybody willing to I've even shared some pretty that was actually one of the first things I did whenever I first started. I was like, look, I gotta share my shit and air my shit out. And I talked a lot about mental health in the early aspect. I was like, okay, I gotta talk about my scenario with mental health, just so nobody thinks I'm coming at this from a bro Instagram mentality of being no, I have really been in the dumps before, so I get it. but yeah, like if you're not willing to do, I even think about that with like the motivational speakers online and stuff. Like half of them, it's like, what have you done? Like I'm seeing nothing but you just like regurgitating good talking points essentially, but like yeah, without any action behind them. It's like, anybody can go on and make a ranting video about getting out of bed like David Goggins, but it's the fact that David Goggins runs a fucking 100 miles every weekend that makes that actually inspiring. It's like, yeah.
You've got a pretty broad spectrum of content based on, like, going back to what you said, right? Like if I look, I think the video you referenced, if I'm not mistaken, that one was titled something like "A Message to My Generation," the conversation no one is having.
Yeah.
You've hit 18,000 views almost on that, which I'm sure you're proud of. And as you've said, though, I think you're right that it's probably been your most viral.
As far as like, long forum, that was definitely. I have some reels that, and it's funny too, because like whenever I got into this, I was kind of like, okay, I'm going to do everything exactly how I want. Like I'm not going to let these algorithms play with me and stuff. And it's like it's kind of fucked because like even now Instagram punishes you, dude. I can make a video that's 1 minute and 4 seconds, and it'll get like 500 views. But if I make that video, literally, if I just speed up that video and repost it. I'll get like
a minute, like 99
I'll get
seconds.
I'll get like 20 I'll get it like 20 plus K. And it's like, so like they're just shafting you. Yeah. Cause essentially
can you explain that to me?
Yeah. So as soon as, cause reels are, like Instagram wants to, compete with TikTok, right? So Instagram is essentially only rewarding creators that use reels. And so anything over a minute, like with TikTok, you can have videos that are, I think they're up to like 5 minutes now for TikTok, but on Instagram, their reels are capped at a minute, and anything over a minute then all of a sudden gets classified as like an IGTV video.
Yes.
And they just don't push. They literally punish you for making IGTV videos. And they've even said now too, where it's like, we're not a picture sharing platform anymore. And it's like, okay, well, you guys are literally just trying to copy TikTok, and like you're kind of pigeonholing your creators. Like even I know like insanely talented photographers who are like, why the fuck am I making reels about my photos now? Like it's the only way. But if I don't, my engagement gets shafted by like 75%. Like, so it's like they literally make you use those avenues. And I've been actually kind of like looking for somebody who can edit as well, so that I can just whatever on the daily stuff. I'll focus on editing the shorter end stuff and have somebody do the long form, because I miss kind of bringing that nuance a little bit. You kind of get handcuffed when you're trying to shove talking points into a minute.
Yeah, and just for the listener, his Instagram, Liam Out Loud. I'll put in the show notes page. I just looked at, for example, your reels versus your videos on your Instagram page. Like other than that one that we mentioned that was like from late 2021, let me see as I'm saying this. That video was from January 2021. That video had 18,000 views. The rest of your videos are all, sort of maxing out around 1,000. A couple of them hit, 3,000. But if I go to your reels, you had one that hit 840,000. Most of yours are 5,000 plus. You have another one that's 160,000 views or plays for the reels. And so I'm just looking at pure numbers, and I totally see exactly what you're talking about. That 85K, 12K on reels, 16K, all over the place, but high volume. But like you said, it's a minute and a half and 5 seconds. It's now classified as a video, and it gets an IGTV video essentially, and it doesn't.
Yeah, and they won't even show it to anybody that follows you on their homepage and stuff. And it's funny too, because now we sit here as a society and we're like, where'd everyone's attention span go? And it's like we're literally manufacturing short attention spans. It's wild to me that we sit here and like talk about it as if it's come out of nowhere, or it's like the kids these days. And it's like, no, we're
being conditioned.
Yeah. This isn't by mistake.
Well, and what's funny is like you see that, but at the same time you see the explosion of long form.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we've got this like minute long stuff, and then you've got hour plus stuff. that seems to be the focus. Anything sort of in between is getting squeezed. Just because of like the algorithms, right? Obviously, people who are looking for long form conversations aren't going, to Instagram Reels to find them. They're usually hunting them out themselves, podcasts, whatever. But the stuff, I think about Facebook and Instagram, the social media is not pushing the long form; it's pushing the condensed version.
Mm-hmm.
And we just had we'd have a podcast episode that'll be out either around the week after or the week before this episode, where we were talking about dystopian novels. And one of the things that when we were in the conversation, he was mentioning that I think it was in 1984, they start condensing terminology. I can't remember. It might be the wrong one.
Yeah. That's
right?
Newspeak. Yeah, Newspeak.
Yeah, the Newspeak where they were like, Ministry of Truth was like mini truth or something like that. Like, and it was this. I see a parallel with like what we're doing with like condensing things down to the shortest version to like spoon feed the perspective, as opposed to having the nuance of substance that applies to everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even too on the Newspeak idea, when you think about the wars going on around language right now, because that was the whole concept with Newspeak, was like confuse the language but also just shorten it. And the idea behind that is like, if you have a citizenry that can't even have anything resembling a productive conversation because we are so, like, I mean, even think about it right now. Like, what's a main something that's going viral right now? It's about the new Supreme Court nominee not being able to define woman, and it's like we're so hung up on words that we can't even have a productive conversation. And that's and what's crazy is that's actually something straight out of a CIA playbook. As to there was a CIA playbook, and there was 3 steps to ruin any company, and one of them was infiltrate the board of advisors and make sure the language around the company gets so convoluted that nobody can talk about anything productive. And it's like that's what we're seeing on like a national scale, and it is crazy. And like, yeah, the parallels that I see between both George Orwell's 1984 and Aldous Huxley's Brave New World is like we're headed for an amalgamation of those 2 books, and it's not pretty.
So I guess we can, if I transition this to, you talked a little bit about your freelance work, and I remember our producer sent us the video of you on ET Transport talking about false accusations on Freedom Convoy, being like, "Hey, can we get this guy on the show?" And I was like, "Yeah, I've been working on it." But that work, I'm curious if you could speak to that a little bit more. How did you end up doing stuff like that? Is that sort of, when it comes to a, self-employed freelance person, is that sort of the bread and butter of your, what's, how, I'll say, like, how are you making money without giving us specifics? But then, this is, I see this as like new media versus legacy media. And I wonder, when it comes to the sort of related to what we were talking about with the short versus long, do you see legacy media sort of having a much different approach than the new media with respect to segments? Because like I think about like what we used to see on the news, right? It's a 5-minute segment. It barely touches the issue, just gives you like surface level perspective and done. How do you see the difference between, this ET Transport? Obviously the target audience is much more niche or focused. But I'm just curious if you can speak to sort of the different approaches that you've seen and probably why you're in the new media world.
Yeah. So yeah, the freelancing side, I do a bunch of different stuff. So that, yeah. So it's funny. The ET Transport, it's this trucking channel that does even just breakdowns on like how to essentially maximize your profits with gas, the gas prices on the rise, all of this they cover so many topics. They actually very rarely get into the politics stuff, and even I'll do videos for them like kind of comparing America's transport industry to China's, and like the differences in systems that are in place there, what's more productive, what systems they're trying to enact with like automation and all this kind of stuff. And so that's one aspect of what I do. I still do the freelancing videography stuff. So I'll do like weddings and all of that kind of stuff on the side as well. And then the brand videos for liquor brands and
Sorry, what do you mean?
small
What do you mean by
restaurants and stuff.
weddings?
Yeah, so not so like my freelancing work is like all over the board. So as far as like where I make money, it's like every aspect is like, so I'll literally just go do like wedding after movies for videos for people too. Like that's what I originally thought I was going to get into with the videography stuff. And this whole media thing is like, honestly, like that's kind of what I say is like being the unplanned aspect is like, so I started making videos on my own, and then just literally this channel randomly messaged me and was like, hey, would you want to come do some, videos on our channel? And I was like, sure. I mean, yeah, I'll take money any day. Yeah. And then even honestly, everything I do right now is word of mouth. Like I've been like, it's a scraping by thing at the moment. But I'm still even just stoked that, 6 months ago, I wasn't even thinking anything in the realms of being self-employed. And now I'm like sustaining myself self-employed, which is pretty dope. But yeah, so it's kind of it's a big mash of everything. I'm not just in the media realm at the moment, but as far as what I see, the differences is I think that's what it is that there's like a level of humanity to the new media that's kind of coming around, where it's like, you see people like Russell Brand, or you see people like Rogan, or you see any of these large commentators. They all come in with a heavy dose of humiliation, humility. Like they'll be humiliation. Yeah,
They've had lots of humiliation.
Yeah,
probably.
they've had lots. Yeah, that's why. But like, they'll all come in and they own up to essentially like, I fucked up. Like, when was the last time you see Rogan all the time be like, hey, I fucked this up on the last podcast. Like I got this wrong. Like what, like the Antifa starting fires thing. Like he came out like immediately afterwards, and there was no large public cry for him to do so. And then you see on the other end the news, and you're like, even look at somebody like Matt Taibbi, who's great, and he's covered it all in the whole issue around like the Iraq war. It's like the media literally created the Trojan horse to go into Iraq, and what happened afterwards, like it was all a lie, and everybody that helped feed that lie got promotions. Like nobody was sitting there being like, oh, we really fucked up. Like, we shouldn't have, these intelligence reports. Like, I don't know if you've heard too much, but essentially what happened there was the intelligence community was like, if we just make these reports confusing enough that we give them to the reporter, they'll just think the worst. Like essentially they had nothing in the reports, but they were like, just make it so confusing to anybody reading it what these military reports would mean that they have to think the worst, and just like litter the words weapons of mass destruction throughout them, even though we don't have any actual tangible proof of them. And so that's what ended up happening. It wasn't like a direct like, hey, we're going to lie to you and we would like you to lie to the public. It's like, no, it's they got bamboozled. But it's like, yeah, that's your job as a journalist, or if you're going to be doing that, is to make sure that you can't get bamboozled by these people that want to use your outlet. And so I think that's a big thing with the new media compared to legacy media, is just the honesty of like, hey, we don't actually know what's all going on here. Things are confusing, blah, 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 but let's try and figure it out together. Whereas the news and like, I mean, the legacy media will just be like, yeah, no, we've got it all figured out. You just trust us, take it on faith. And it's like, well, you continually get it wrong time and time again. So like, your faith is kind of wearing out.
Mm-hmm. Well, and what's funny is, as you were saying that, I was sort of thinking about, 20 years ago, roughly, is the time frame of what you were talking about, weapons of mass destruction. We went from the media, let's say the vast majority of media players being bamboozled, to today, largely they're just mouthpieces of the government, and they know it willingly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, especially in Canada. Like, Canada's, media is, I mean, they're all bought and paid for, right? But it's I would say, I just look at the last 20 years and see this continued degradation of that behemoth. And in terms of all of them, right? Across the board. I mean, you look at CNN right now, just an absolute dumpster fire trying to put it out and turn it around.
Well, even think about CBC in terms of Trudeau and how Trudeau literally said, don't worry if your viewership gets hurt. We will just supplement your losses. Like, So they're literally saying,
Wow.
don't
Really?
Yeah. There was an actual statement put out by Trudeau's government that was like, to the CBC, which was saying how, I'm paraphrasing, but it was pretty much like, keep doing what you're doing, even though it's hurting your ratings because everyone can see through your bullshit. They were like, keep doing what you're doing, and we'll just up your funding if you lose viewership.
Yeah. Okay, because in school, like, so as a teacher and teaching, there's a subject, media literacy, that students, that you got to teach the students. And so what I'd ask you, in regards to media literacy, what are some things that um, that you would recommend to everybody in regards to having good media literacy? Because it's a blessing now that we have, because of the internet, we do have independent journalists, and we Joel and I have been echoing the sentiment for a while now that there are people who know how to navigate that space in regards to curating content that is balanced, but then there are those who don't, and they rely on traditional legacy media for the information. So what are some tips or tricks you can give in regards to media literacy?
The biggest one that I've ever come across is understanding that people. So anytime in an article where it says something along, there was actually a very good in the CBC. There's a good example of this recently. They said a government official behind closed doors said to a CBC reporter, and then went on to talk about this thing about the Freedom Convoy. And it's like, anything like that is just straight up propaganda. There is no truth to that statement. Like, I'm sorry, you're going to put into an article, some unnamed person said to another unnamed person behind a closed door that that something happened. It's like, no, that's not reporting. So any time that there isn't names being put behind opinions, that's pretty much just straight up narrative building. And also too, just and it is tough because it's hard with people. I don't think any one source of media is good, even if it's somebody like Rogan. Like, I don't think that should be your only source of media, and it's really about finding, say, 2 or 3 minimum differing viewpoints. Whether it's like, you listen to your Rogan, you listen to your CNN take, and then you listen to the Fox News take, and you kind of got like a whole spectrum there, and then you just go like, okay, what along these 3 coverings of this story, what 3 points between all of them match up? And that's usually where your truth is. And anything on the outside that like one person only said, and it's like, you have to take all that stuff seriously as well. But yeah, I also follow the money. Like, follow the money is a big one. like that's so huge. Even just knowing that, like, even
Brought to
for
you by
instance,
Pfizer.
Yeah, even just knowing that the Independent, which is hilarious, the news outlet, the Independent, is 51% owned by the Saudi royal family. Like, so the Independent is just pumping out whatever the Saudi royal family wants you to hear at that point. So like, you kind of have to know who's behind what outlets. And I mean, honestly, I look at that and you see a lot of people do shaming, and I don't even like this kind of stuff where like people will shame the everyday like moms and dads that are raising their kids, both have full-time jobs, and it's like, yeah, they don't have time to dig and find out who owns what media company. Right. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of, honestly, it's like it's such a hole that like I don't even know if there's an easy fix to it per se, but I think we're on the right trend. And I mean, that's what they're trying, that's what these media outlets are realizing. That's why these hits are so hard against Rogan, is because they're going like, you'll even hear like Brian Stelter on CNN be like, why doesn't anybody want to listen to us anymore? Like, they don't even have a fact checker room. And it's like, well, your fact checkers don't fact check. So like, yeah, nobody gives a fuck. Yeah. So like, nobody gives a fuck. So like, of course they're going to go listen to them. But yeah, I don't really see a quick fix to it. I think there's just going to be a big power grab right now on information. And I mean, that's what you're seeing with the increased censorship. And that's essentially how they're fighting the battle now, is they're not even, they're not even participating in the information war from a sense of like, okay, I'm going to fight your good information with my better information. It's like, no, I'm just going to say that you can't say your good information.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think, your point about the independent is an interesting one. I would word it slightly differently, and I think using RT is a really good example, in that I would have worded it that the Saudi family prevents things they don't want seen.
That's true. Yeah.
Right. As opposed to sort of pushing the entire newsroom, right? It's more of a gatekeeper or a veto role. And so my joke with regards to RT is like, people are like, oh, it's Russian news. Da, da, da. I was like, so I don't trust it on Russia, but I trust it very well on Canada.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? Because like when RT is talking about Canada, sure, there may be an opportunity for propaganda, especially during the war right now, that stuff that's going on. But pre that, right, let's say 2020, 2021, anything coming out of RT on Canada, I don't really see a reason to be propagandized. And and so there's a likelihood that that's going to be less biased on Canada, and they will be most likely biased on Russia. It's like the same thing with CBC. I trust them more, other than US, I trust them more on other countries reporting than I do on Canadian content, because they're like, inherently biased.
Yeah, I actually think, and I think that's a framing I'll steal for sure. Is that because it is a little bit myopic to say that they create 100% of the narrative, whereas it's definitely much more on point to say they hold back, and that's what you have to be aware of too. I think there's a saying where it's I think Will Ryush said it, or no, it was Saagar. Saagar said it recently. He said, actually, that's a great one. If anybody is looking for like one media source, Breaking Points with Krystal and Saagar is a great, you can find them on YouTube as well. That's like a great, Saagar is a conservative and Krystal is a liberal, and they just have very good conversations from two differing points about very pertinent topics. But he had a saying, which is, what they don't show you is more important than what they show you. And that's also that's something you got to keep in mind with the propaganda side as well, is like, that's where you have to go to like other countries' news sources sometimes to find out about your own country, because of course your own country's not going to tell you the bad things about it. So, when we see like just the straight up lies is what's happening around our country right now, even everything from the COVID stuff to inflation to, I mean, it's all intertwined, but like the whole lies around it are just insane. Like, I mean, they won't take any personal responsibility for any of it, so you do have to go elsewhere to find the accountability.
No, I think that's a very, very true point. There's a good website I'll mention that Darnell shared with me before this podcast. It's called AllSides.com. I'll put it in the show notes page. It's a pretty, like, the similar concept to what you've said, right? This is more about having friends intentionally. That's sort of the impetus behind this organization. But having conversations with people who have different views than you, similar to what you had said, right? Take in the Fox News, take in this, take in that. And so you have a plethora of perspectives, because there's just so much noise at the same time. And I think where you see the overlap is helpful. But I will say this, with respect to Ukraine, people have been asking me, where am I at? What do I think? So the great one-liner punchline I would say is like, I'm against the Ukraine government. I'm against the Russian government. I'm for the innocent people in both countries. But my quote about sort of the media is, when everybody is telling you the same story, and I think I made a Facebook post, I said, when the new cathedral is all telling you the same story, it's likely just that, a story. And so you also have to be worried about when everybody's saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Right? Like, how much is Russia news from, let's say, Fox and CNN have a massive overlap, whereas, other issues don't have that same overlap.
Yeah, if you want to find out this is like the great thing about YouTube is now, like, you don't even have to necessarily go and find interpretations of what things are happening. You can go to, there's a great video from a year ago about Putin on the World Economic Forum stage doing it's like a 40-minute speech on at Davos, and he talks about kind of how this American world domination plan of this whole great reset, this idea that the one world, the new world order, and pretty much was saying a year ago how this would lead to an all against all war is what he called it. And it's like, yeah, I don't know. I want to go straight to the devil's tongue too. Like, if I'm going to be sitting here being told what what Putin's doing, all of this kind of stuff, it's like I'd rather just go listen to Putin and be like, what's he doing? That doesn't mean I'm sitting there being like, yeah, I love everything you're saying. Like, I mean, yeah, the guy's clearly fucking he's on it. He's on one right now. But yeah, like you got to go straight to the source, and we can do that now. You can listen to straight from what Trudeau actually said. You can listen to straight what Zelensky actually said. You can listen to what Putin has actually said. You can listen to what Biden has actually said. You don't really need even these media middlemen essentially anymore. Like that can be like, here's what I think about what this person said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, Darnell talks about going to the source material pretty regularly. As I mean, especially in the let's call it the race debate. We had an episode where just talking about the abolitionists and what did they hold to as views, because you've got people today propagating that the abolitionists held this view, when you go to the source material, it's like, wait a second, that's actually a misrepresentation.
Yeah, like right. I mean, even you could think about it goes way past any politics. Even like you can look at fucking philosophers, like Nietzsche got branded as a Nazi for a long time, even though in his books he openly talks about anti-Semitism, like being rampant in Europe and how disgusting it was. Like he was not a fan of anti-Semitism at all. And what happened afterwards was his sister ended up taking all of his workings after he died, because she got the rights to them, and then convinced the Nazis that his whole concept about an Übermensch was really about German superiority. And then they just ended up using Nietzsche's work as propaganda essentially for the Nazis. And if you go read his actual books, he's talking about everything that they're doing as like these. I mean, he died before they were, but like any of the group tribalism, any of that kind of stuff, about how just ridiculous it all is. So it's like you have to go to the source. And I don't even, anytime somebody tells me, and it really sucks, because like now we're at this point where they've cried wolf so many times, no matter what it is. And like, I don't even like living in this headspace, but somebody says like that person's racist. I would rather live in a world where I can just be like, yeah, that person's probably racist. But like now people are like, that person's racist. And I go like, probably not. Like I want to live in a world where when people say things about other people, like you can take it with some, at least be like, okay, maybe it's not, I'm not getting the whole story, but there's at least some accuracy in these ideas. But like, yeah, even somebody like, I mean, even you look at somebody like Rogan, and it's like, I have not met anybody that dislikes Rogan that has actually listened to him. Mm-hmm. Like you can sit there and be like, oh, like I'm not a huge fan of the show, it doesn't really do it for me, but like nobody that has actually listened to him has ever been like, that dude's evil, like he needs to be taken off the air. It's like, it's all these it's the same thing with Jordan Peterson. Like, it's anybody that they're essentially playing telephone with their opinions of people, and it's just like, that's where we're at in the world now. Like, I mean, even I saw somebody talking about, I saw an article yesterday about how Russell Brand is now a commentator for the far right, and you're like, what the fuck? Like the guy is literally a hippie. Like he's more hippie than 1970s hippies. Like what the fuck? Like how is he some far right figure? So yeah, we've just reached this point where it's our perception of people is so distorted as to what they actually are.
Yeah, no, totally. I think for me, when I'm now, especially doing the Sixth Sense report for so long, I've definitely, my discernment in my in trying to navigate media has definitely changed. So, for example, I don't take my cues, like I don't take my social or moral cues from what I hear on the news. Whether it's from the left or from the right, whether it's conservative or liberal, a lot of times is when people come and ask me, my straight up answer is like, I don't know. I have to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
But it would be like, well, what's there to think about? Clearly, X is the way, right? X is the way. But just navigating media, I'm just like, well, no, actually, I don't know, and I need time. So people are like, oh yeah, so wait, you should be on top of this. I'm like, yeah, but doing the work to find out both sides and actually going to checking out primary sources, and then when finding it and then thinking about it, that stuff takes time, man. And so I'm always weary about people telling me what side to be on.
Yeah, and it's always from a moral lens too. It's never from
Yes.
it's never from rationale. It's always because
that's right.
it's always because this is what's right. This is the good thing. And it's like, well, literally that whole concept in and of itself is subjective. Like the whole idea of morality is insanely subjective. So like I think I tend to not go towards any party and be like, okay, this is the moral party. This is the one that's got my back. And I grab all of my principles from philosophers of ages that were different from us, like, you know, the Marcus Aurelius's, the Nietzsche's, the Young's. Like looking back at history, you kind of have to take yourself out of the present moment, because like you even look at some of the philosophers, like I would say like the most prominent present day philosopher is Peterson. Like a lot of, sure, he gets dragged into political conversations every now and again, but most of what he's talking about is like, I mean, if you go listen to his maps of meaning on YouTube, it's like that's as philosophical as it gets. And I think we'll look back at him in 200, 300 years from now and realize that he was the philosopher of this time, much like a Nietzsche or a Jung. And it's funny because like I have a lot of heavily left-leaning friends, like essentially the woke crowd that I rip on a lot. And it's like I rip on the ideas, but maybe not necessarily the people. But like you'll have them say stuff like, I really like Jung, but then say that they can't stand Peterson. And I'm like, well, Peterson is literally a Jungian psychologist applying Jung's theories to today's present landscape. So like people like those ideas of past times because there's not like the present day emotion attached to them of whatever conflicts are happening. So they can kind of just see like back at, they're not attached to whatever scenario is happening. So they can see the ideas clearly, but it's once all of a sudden those ideas are being attached, whether it's, you know, group guilt and or tribalism or any of these things that are like just objectively terrible ideas. And yeah, it's great in a historical sense. Everyone loves them. But when you start talking today about, hey, how maybe we shouldn't make immutable characteristics our defining figures, then people all of a sudden start getting a little bit antsy because they're like, well, no, we have to deal with these issues that are happening presently. But then when you look back at history, you're like, oh my God, how could they be so tribalistic? And it's like we kind of just get emotional. And I do think that we need to essentially have our principles from, I mean, that's what, you know, religion was in a sense too. And that was Nietzsche's whole concept of the death of God, was that, you know, there's some things that humans won't be able to answer for themselves. And we do need kind of something based in faith to provide those answers to us, because science won't give us all of the answers, like the meaning of life and stuff. And it's like, so I really do think that we need to develop our moral stances and our ideas on principles and essentially our character from some of those minds, like looking back a little bit more, that don't necessarily have a idea as to what, or sorry, they don't have a vested interest in today's society going a certain way, because that's what you see now with like looping back to everybody making it about morality. They, you know, you're talking people, you know, Hitler would have made like his whole final solution was a moralistic viewpoint. He was a victim, like he viewed himself as a victim. So I really do think we need to like take ourselves out of these positions to find our moral stances and then not budge on them under present circumstances. And I think that's the big thing, is like people essentially picking when they want to be principled and when they don't.
Right. Yeah, no, well, okay, so for me as a Christian, uh, the way we see morality is Jesus Christ is our righteousness. So our righteousness is imputed to us. It's given to us. So I'm in the sight of God, I'm seen as perfect. I am justified. I'm right with God, despite my fallenness and foolishness and sinfulness and wickedness. And the way how that plays into me navigating media is because I know I'm righteous, not because I'm a good person, but because of the work of Christ. I don't feel the need to virtue signal. I don't feel any pressure from somebody to say, "Oh, if you're not down with X, you're not a good person, you're not a good Christian." Well, the Bible teaches there's no such thing as good people. The only people who are good, right? Like that old saying by Paul Washer, right? Good people go to hell, right? So I'm not trying to be a good person. I'm already justified. I'm still working on myself and things I got to straighten out, but I don't, because of the righteousness of Christ that I have, I don't ever feel the need to capitulate to the masses.
Yeah. Like, dude, proselytizing morality is just not a I can't get around that idea at all, whether it's in a religious sense, whether it's in a political sense, any of that idea. It's like, yeah, no, you don't get to decide. You this singular person or this institution or this entity don't get to decide what's moral for the rest of us. That's kind of a, like, morality in my lens is something that humanity and societies all together, it's a group effort, essentially, to be like, hey, this is what we're going to, it's like what came first, the chicken or the egg, essentially. And in regards to laws and morality, it's like, no, we decide as a society, as a group, as a collective, that something is not okay anymore. And then laws are changed to reflect that. Whereas now what you're seeing is like these pushes to make laws for morality that we haven't necessarily decided on as a society yet. And it's like, I don't like that idea at all, that all of a sudden there's this institution or this figure that can all of a sudden, especially now, in present day, mandate morality, essentially.
Well, what's funny is when you say that, so there's two things that come to my mind. First is, what Darnell was talking about. I stole this term from a podcast. Essentially, we see performative virtue signaling or performative virtue. So it's the virtue signaling itself is what people perceive as virtue, as opposed to normal. Like, the virtue signaling was supposed to be signaling of the virtuous thing you did, but the performance of virtue signaling has become the virtue.
Yeah, that is true, because it's not even necessarily whether there's anything behind the actions. Like, it's funny to me because I'm pretty against the whole, the virtue idea of, I mean, people won't even come out and say it, but like, this whole push for communism and bringing it and smashing capitalism and all this. It's like, it's supposed to be this like virtuous idea as to like, well, it's unfair. Capitalism is exploiting people. And I'm like, well, what have you done to help anything in your community? You talk about these, like, enacting these laws to, help people that are worse off. And I'm like, all I hear coming out of your mouth is what would benefit you, but you're disguising it as what would benefit everybody. And like, even for me, it's like, I speak out about that kind of stuff all the time. These political views of far left political that, I mean, are running rampant in today's society. And it's like, I don't know, I've raised a fair chunk of money over the last 2.5-3 years for people that are in need through multiple fundraisers. Like, I think I'm up to somewhere like 70K now. And it's like, yeah, like, I don't know, like, I look at that and I just look at people on the outside. I'm like, you haven't even literally volunteered for one Sunday to help your community, and now you're wanting to mandate laws that all of a sudden you're so for the community. And I'm like, I don't know. I like, yeah, this idea of, and then going back to your idea where it's like, that's where the virtue is. The virtue is saying like, I want to enact these laws to help out the community. And it's like and then you get claps and you get applauses for that, but then they don't actually have to fucking do anything.
You're not actually serving anyone. You're not actually helping people. You're just mandating other people to try to help people. And
like
whether or not it even happens is not even relevant.
Dude, I had a defining moment in my childhood, and I actually talked to my dad recently about it, and I was like, "Do you remember this?" And because he was talking to me about why I feel the need to, because he was kind of like trying to pick my brain, being like, "Why do you like put yourself on the line? Like sometimes these fundraisers will go for like a month at a time," and he was like, "Why do you feel the need to help people?" And I was like, "Dad, like you used to do shit like this all the time growing up. Like maybe it wasn't necessarily like a fundraiser, but I was like, I remember one time we were going through a Tim Hortons drive-through, and my dad just bought like the order behind the car behind him. This was like long before the whole pay it forward idea, and he just randomly started buying people's like Tim Hortons coffee anytime I was in the truck with them, and he would go out of his way to be like, yeah, don't tell anybody I did that. And I was like, why? He's like, I don't know. It just, nobody like really needs to know. So like anybody that is, and that was like a defining moment for me. Obviously I do the fundraising stuff. So like I'll talk about the fundraisers as I'm doing them, but the whole idea of making your virtue your identity is just like, it's, I don't know. It comes with zero cost to me whenever I see these people doing it. Like you're not putting anything on the line for yourself, and you're just trying to reap all the benefits of positioning yourself as a moral person. And I just don't see that getting us anywhere in long term, both whether it's the individual doing it or whether it's society as a whole.
I'm curious your take. I have this perspective that, you know, separation of church and state almost needs to now incorporate sort of a secular church concept. Going back to what you were saying, right? We want to legislate morality to some extent, as opposed to, you know, let's say a constitutional or, you know, rights-based of what government's role is, where to protect those things. Instead, we're now, you know, using government to legislate morality. It goes back to the saying where it's like politics is downstream from culture. But as you've described it, it's like politicians are trying harder and harder to shape culture through legislation. And I think we're going to continue to see sort of this conflict that results in demonstrating the inability to even do so. But I'm curious, you know, your thoughts on that, as well as does there need to sort of be an incorporation of separation of morality and state?
Agree or disagree with our views? Give us your 2 cents. You can leave your comments on any of our social media platforms or email us at sixcentsreport@gmail.com.
6 cents makes change. 6 cents makes change. 6 cents makes change.
I think for sure. And because I think what ended up happening was when we separated church and state, and I mean, the whole concept of Nietzsche's death of God is, and this is something I've written and talked about, is our deep rooted like religious tendencies that are in our, like, I mean, anybody who thinks that the beliefs of our ancestors for the last tens of thousands of years aren't still lingering in our thought processes, it's like that's, we're not that clean. We're not that clean slate of humans. We come with some programming, and spirituality and religiousness is a deep part of that programming. And this is something like, dude, I was an outspoken atheist for most of my life, and I wouldn't say I've joined any specific religion, but I've definitely opened myself up to spirituality in a big sense, because I'm like, okay, yeah, there are answers that we cannot provide ourselves with. So we do need to look to something a little bit more spiritual in that to solve that problem. And, you know, I talk about how I don't really think we ever did a clean separation of church and state, and now it's more so that we just look at the state as the church. Like the state is appropriating it now, but like we don't worship, biblical deities anymore. We worship political gods, and that's what you're seeing. Like people are putting their religious, essentially their like programming for religious and faith and religiousness and faith into politicians. Like you can literally see it. Like, this party is the devil and our leader is God that's going to, usher in,
save us.
Is going to usher in and salvation. And it's like it's literally religious thinking now in terms of politics. And so I think it's like dangerous in that sense. And I don't really know what the fix is for that, but like I definitely do think I tend to be a little bit libertarian in that sense, where it's like anything that only brings harm to yourself should not be law. Like if you want to, I'm not saying this is something I would support or openly say is a good idea for anybody, but like if you do heroin all day, like maybe you shouldn't go to jail for that unless you're robbing people to get money for your heroin, or any of that sense. So it's like I don't really think we should be more like legislating what is and isn't moral, but we've definitely got into that realm, especially since at early 1900s that started kicking off, where it was like, okay, we're going to start legislating what makes you a good human, and it's like I don't like that path at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and I think the problem, using drugs is a good example, it fails to actually wrestle with, hey, is this something we should be solving on, and I'll use a political, it's like a subsidiary level, right? Like what is the lowest level that we should actually solve these problems at, has become so foreign to all of politics, right? It's all about federal government, whether it's in America and Canada, right? But they continue pushing more and more things to a federal level. And I think that has to do with the way that we elect people, the celebrity side of politics. All of that continues to drive this impetus to like, oh, we need to central plan solution everything, as opposed to actually wrestling with effective solutions, as opposed to well-motivated slogans behind a legislation.
Yeah. And well, I mean, that's literally the world we're in now, is even if you look at the group kind of running everything from, if you were to try to name them, it would be the World Economic Forum and like kind of their surrounding people. But everything they do is through slogans and symbols. And it's like, it's just this short, like, I mean, those aren't real solutions. Like, like hashtag equality for all. It's like, where does that fucking get us? Like, we need a little bit more deeper
substance
thinking than this. Yeah. And then also just being like, okay, we're just going to legislate that everybody is equal, and therefore we're going to, like, I mean, did you see what the Ontario's teacher union did recently? Like, I think it was a couple months ago. They made it so that if a 50-50 white to minority representation doesn't happen naturally, then they are going to downweight the white votes to and upweight the minority votes to.
That's right.
So it's like, okay, well,
Halton,
first of all,
I think it was
like,
Halton District School Board. Yeah, the weighted voting.
Okay, that was Halton.
Yeah, it was Halton. Yeah.
And I'm like, that's a terrible idea. And actually, Will Reusch had a great insight on that. He goes, he was saying how it's inevitable that will lead to anti-Semitism. Like if you look at a lot of the white faculty in schooling is Jewish. So he's like, you're actually going to end up, it was something down in the States. He was, it was like 40% of white teachers in his school board, I think it was, were Jewish. And it's like, so yeah, you're going to end up, I guess it's just the whole visible minority thing too that doesn't make sense to me, where that's where we're legislating equality from that realm now, where it's like there's no idea of minorities outside of sexuality, gender, and skin. It's like, well, yeah, there's all sorts of minorities for that kind of stuff that are going to get left out of all of those conversations. And it's like, where do you draw that line? And I think that's where that's what we're seeing right now is where is the line on all of this? Where is the line on mandating morality? Because I mean, there's people that have tried to do it in the past, and it's never really worked out that well.
But I think it comes back to my sentiment about like being grounded in what righteousness is, so you don't feel the need to be a part of the group think. And so part of it is now you're not necessarily concerned about being morally upright, but you're concerned with being logically right, like academically right. Like, does this actually make sense? Versus right, like policies, just because a policy has a good intention doesn't mean it's going to have a good outcome. And so it's important for us to well, not just us, but just in general as a whole, to think through the policies and the ideas intellectually, and trying to come to the intellectually correct conclusion versus, does this look good on paper?
Am I perceived as virtuous with this opinion?
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean that is just, I mean, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? So I don't see that. I do genuinely worry about it, and it's funny because like this whole getting into the politics realm and commentating on it is like I got so disillusioned by all of the politics. I got like into it a little bit in 2016, obviously, whenever the whole Trump Clinton campaign was going on, and then in like 2017, I was like, this shit is just too ridiculous. Like, I started really focusing on health and philosophy and all that kind of stuff. I didn't even pay attention to modern day politics anymore for a long time. And then it wasn't until like 2021 that I was like, okay, I need to really start paying attention to this shit again, because
I think my life.
Yeah, and I think too, and I think that's where we're at right now, where we have to kind of get out of this realm of thinking that if we live in a true democracy, which I don't think we do, and I don't think we maybe ever have, then every citizen's essentially voice, because we're told that voice is through our vote, but I mean our votes are so I've got a whole issue with that whole process anyways, but it's like that doesn't really actually go that far. So really what we have to do is talk in the public square, and citizens have to lead that charge, because otherwise, and that's what really worries me about the current state of affairs right now is the whole idea of only those people can talk about it. Like anybody that comes at me now, I don't care how rude they are, I will confirm their view and I will ask them to go on an Instagram live and talk to me about it. I'll be like even if somebody says the meanest shit to me, I'm like, yeah, you are right. Like, I am probably a fucking idiot. I would love to learn more if you want to come online and hop on an IGTV live with me and have a civil conversation. Like, I would love to. I'd love to have my blind spots checked, and I'll literally frame it like that, and nobody is willing to. And I've had people say, like, there was a friend, I posted it on my stories recently. There was somebody that reached out to me, and I said, gave that exact statement pretty much. And they were like, I'm not an authority on this. And it's like, we're literally just talking about what we think of this protest. Like, it was in regards to the Freedom Convoy protest. I was like, why can't two people get online and talk about their opinions on this thing? Like, why do you feel the need to be an authority figure? Like, who is an authority figure on the Freedom Convoy? And that's what they do, is they take these authority. It's the
CBC, of course.
Yeah. It's like they take the talking points from authority, and they're like, I can parrot these authoritative points, and then, but I'm not allowed to bring any of them my own to the table. So it's like that's what I really worry about more so, is like this idea that we can't talk without, like, that, like, we literally don't even have the right to talk about these things. It's I don't know, it really worries me.
No, I think that's a fair point. I generally tend to troll those people on Twitter with a tweet, a GIF or GIF or whatever you want to call it, of the NPC army.
Yeah.
Face, just like, because I think it's has anyone taken you up on that offer to
No.
actually have a conversation when they're critical or rude in their criticisms?
No, I've probably tossed out 100 offers, and I've got nothing.
That's crazy.
Literally, most of them won't even respond. And then I actually had one person recently be like, because it was in regards to my video against talking about Ibram Kendi, saying how to love capitalism is to love racism, and to love racism is to end up loving capitalism. And I said, and I was like, that's kind of ironic coming from the guy who charges $25,000 an hour for a public speech. and I got some pushback on that. And I was like, yeah, would you like to come on and like, yeah, talk about the nature of capitalism then? And they said, sure, I charge $10,000 an hour for my time. And I was like, then why are you in a comment section? Like these people, like they're just so fucking like, I don't know, this whole idea where it's like, I also really don't like you see it coming out of that thought camp a lot where it's not my job to educate you. And it's like, what? Like, what are we doing here if we're not talking and trying to find common ground? If the only thing we can do is I'm right, and then it's up to you to go educate yourself on why I'm right. Like, I don't know. I'm getting so disillusioned by the public conversation. And when I started this project, I was very like, I'm going to do that ground, like between when I was talking about how I had the anti and the pro crowd both latch onto my first video, and I was like, oh, I'm onto something here. And then now I've just realized that the minute you even give the ones, I mean, it's, you know what? It's actually both too. Like I talked about the like some xenophobia coming from the like essentially the notion that immigrants are lazy and they're stealing our jobs like can't coexist in the same world. Like either they're stealing our jobs or they're lazy. And the conservative crowd got just as triggered as that as any woke crowd did. But it's like, I don't know, that's where like I get worried, is these conversations now are just so like, say what I want you to say so that you can make me, so that I reaffirm my worldview, or fuck you. And yeah, no, it's a tough time for conversations.
Yeah, we got to find a way to turn them around. Definitely. And I think what you're doing is a good thing in regards to, always giving those who oppose your view like a platform for conversation. And I think, and Joel and I kind of say this too, like, we want to see more dialogue, less monologue. And then sometimes when you have a platform, people are reluctant to get it in with you if you have a platform, and especially if you invite them on to go back and forth, because it could be sometimes they could be kind of intimidated by like a platform in general.
Yeah, and that's a real thing. But honestly, if and to me, I look at that and go like, well, if you're scared of that, then you shouldn't be sharing your opinions, whether it's in a comment section or whether it's on an Instagram live. And that was a big part of when I first started doing this. I remember like having a conversation with my friend after like my second or third video, and I was like, dude, I don't know if I can keep doing like putting my face. I was getting like serious like anxiety attacks before like posting videos and stuff. Like when I posted that first video I did of a message to my generation, it was I deleted Instagram, all social media and shit off of my phone for 4 days. I had a few friends text me and be like, yo, your video's like popping off. And I was like, don't talk to me about it. Like I was like, I don't even want to pay attention to it right now, because I was so nervous of like putting my thoughts out there. But it's like but after that second or third video, like I decided, I was like, no, like I don't want, if I think that what I have to say is important enough, then I should also think it's important enough to put my face and name beside it. And I think that's what we're missing is like everybody feels like, okay, my voice needs to be heard. But then as soon as there's any sort of essentially skin in the game, then all of a sudden they don't want their voice to be heard. And it's like, well, that's not how it works. I don't think. I think you have to, yeah, you have to own up to it all. And that's kind of why I decided that I was going to continue doing, putting myself in front of the camera and not just doing voiceover stuff.
Yeah. Because ideas have consequences, and a lot of times, when we admire people in history, and we're like, oh man, I love Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah.
Right. But back then, people didn't like Martin Luther King Jr. because
they hated him.
Right. Well, it got him killed. Like his ideas got him killed. And so a lot of times we kind of miss that, and we're kind of like, well, yes, we admire him, but are we actually learning from the courage that a lot of these people from the past has shown, putting their ideas out there, putting their face, like you said, putting their face next to their ideas and putting their livelihood on the line. And it goes back to what you said, Liam, that this is why people go viral. This is why people subscribe, right? To particular pages, because it's authentic, right? You're being you and you're putting truth out there, and people are gravitating to it.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of and I do realize that I was in a different scenario than a lot of people. Like, I recently actually, this is so wild, and so I don't know the full story, but my girlfriend's friend was just let go of their job because they wouldn't come out in full support and weren't posting online about standing with Ukraine, and it was because they were about to go over to Europe and do some. It was like a nonprofit, and they were about to go over to Europe to do some sort of work. And because this person hadn't been verbally outspoken, they decided that it wasn't best for them to participate. And it's like, that's fucked. You can't even go and do the work unless you've become an activist online. And but I think on the other side, where it's like there's kind of a form of activism that's just accepted and is like cheered on, and then anything outside of that activism is considered a dangerous idea, and anybody espousing those dangerous ideas does pay real consequences. And I think that's maybe why I was a bit more willing to do so as well, is because like COVID literally wiped out my job and my passion project. So like I lost everything. So I was like, fuck, okay, if all I got left is my voice, like you're gonna hear it. Like that's you can't that's literally the only thing you can't take from me. You've already taken everything else. So I think I'm in a unique situation in that sense as well, where it's kind of like my back was thrown up against the wall, and it was like, all right, yeah, cool. Like there is no real consequences you can give me now.
Mm-hmm. I want to close the loop slightly on something you said earlier. Your comment about Ibram X. Kendi actually is when we were talking about his book, is where Darnell brought up going back to the source material, because he makes comments about anti-capitalist, capitalist, but it actually doesn't align with the original writings of those about abolitionists and anti-abolitionists.
Mm-hmm.
And again, so sort of sidebar, but your point is valid, because in terms of that commentary, they just like, well, he said it and it sounds morally okay, so I'm gonna keyboard courage telling someone else why they're wrong without even understanding what is he saying. Like he's got a slogan, right? Oh, capitalism is racist. Okay, explain it. Expound that point. Why do you think he's right? Oh, I can't do that. I'm just going to morally align myself with this performative virtue. And to your point, like, you got the Twitter eggs doing the same type of thing, right? Where it's like, you can say the most crudest thing to somebody online because you're like, well, it's anonymous. And I think it's Jordan Peterson, but I don't know who I heard this from, but it's like, our social media commentary has most of it. I mean, maybe mostly Twitter is this. It's like shop talk. It's just like the off the cuff sort of comments that you would make in a work sort of social environment, but now you're saying it to somebody else who you don't know, who's not, you've got this extra level of courage, but it's that type of talk. Obviously the things you say are different, but the way you would talk to somebody, just casually off the cuff comment, when you hear about, some piece of news, right?
There's actually a psychological effect there too, with people being a little bit more prone to aggression and stuff in conversation on comment sections and all of that. If you think about this, it's actually the exact same thing that drives us to road rage, which is, so when we are with a person, we can pick up on their facial features and their body language. So we can pick up if somebody says something, and even the difference of tone between like, hey, that's a really nice shirt, or hey, that's a nice shirt. It's like you've got two completely different tones there. Or even you can see my facial gesture. I mean, we're talking on just audio, so it's like you can't. But at the moment, but in real time, you would be able to see even whether I say that sentence with a smile, whether I say it with whether my eyes are a little bit pinched and I'm being questioning to you, I'm being a little bit more aggressive to you, and we pick up on all those subtle features to our face very, very quickly. Like, I mean, we were literally evolved to do that. Yeah. I mean, we don't even have to consciously process all of that. So when you're in a comment section, you can't actually see how somebody is approaching it. And what ends up happening is essentially your subconscious defaults to one of two things. Your subconscious will either think of depending on your past experiences, it will either think and default to strangers are mean-spirited people trying to take advantage of you at any opportunity, or it means, or your subconscious will go like, that person probably didn't mean that, or like strangers aren't inherently evil. So if your subconscious defaults to the former, then yeah, like anything that questions you in any sort of comment section, or whether it's the person, that accidentally just cut you off, it's like you're going to think that they did it on purpose. You're going to think that they wanted to that they were out to get you. Whereas if you saw their face after they did that, maybe when you honked, they were like genuinely like, oh my God, I can't believe I just did that. And meanwhile, you're, one car back and you're fucking losing your shit about this person that feels terrible about what they just did. And it's the same thing in the comment sections, where it's like, yeah, you literally get a little comment and all of a sudden it's like, oh, this person's trying to take advantage of me. This person's like trying to ruin me. And you just start going off the fucking cuff. And it's like, at that point, there's no reeling you back in. And so like, there's a real disconnect in our way of communicating with online right now. And I actually heard there was Mark Zuckerberg was on the Lex Friedman podcast recently, and it was a very cool interview, because Lex actually kind of pushed him on some things I hadn't heard interviewers push him on before, like some of the ethics on what he does. But actually, I thought Zuckerberg brought up like a really good point. He's like, even our best technology to have virtual conversations aren't good. Like if you even think about Zoom, he's like, we can't even make eye contact. It's impossible to make eye contact, because either I'm looking at my camera, like directly into my camera, so that you can have a semblance of eye contact, or I'm looking at my screen at your eyes, and now you're not getting eye contact from me. So he's like, even on the most advanced software that we have so far, we can't even have anything resembling a in-person conversation. And I was like, yeah, like I think that too is a big issue with our communication issues that are happening across the globe right now, where we're not even able to have effective conversations because we've cut the human aspect out of it. So now it's just all emotion. It's all just essentially what's pre-bottled into you, and then you're just fucking letting it loose on whoever comes across the wrong way.
That comment reminds me about what Elon Musk had said on Joe Rogan's podcast, sort of just regarding sort of a data throughput threshold that's sort of a huge limitation to what you're talking about, right? So like if our technology was more advanced, the amount of data that would be required to sort of get, let's say, our VR sort of experience where you can actually make eye contact, the data throughput, and maybe VR is not the right word. Think of more like holographic sort of scenario. The data throughput that we have as like a technological capacity is too limited to actually do those things. And yeah, it's just I remember this was like 2 years ago, maybe even longer. I think it was the one where Elon had a little cigar blunt in his mouth. I could be wrong, but I think it was that episode where he basically made that comment that we have this data throughput issue that's limiting some of the advances that we can make.
Yeah, I mean, even take that outside of communication and technology, or sorry, I guess just communication, because it's still in technology, but you look at what we're doing with the whole, push for electric vehicles right now, and like we don't even have enough resources to have everybody on that operating system. And I mean, even that comes with its own issues as well. Like nobody wants to talk about the negative effects of mining lithium that come with huge effects and costs to the
what do you mean? Green energy is the way of the future, and it will solve all of our problems.
Yeah, I know. It's like we can't make the pipeline. We can't make a pipeline because it's going to negatively affect indigenous communities. But meanwhile, in Chile, where 25% of the world's lithium comes from, there's 18 indigenous communities surrounding that mine that no longer have clean water because of the lithium mining. And it's like, well, okay, you're just exporting your fucking conscience at that point. Like that's where we're getting to. But yeah, talking about what you're saying, I think we're actually going to reach a point here in the near future where like we kind of tap ourselves out in a little bit of the we're going to see that maybe it's funny because I go back and forth on this every day. I'm like, one day I'm like, fuck, the metaverse is right around the corner, and then next I look at it and go like, are we actually smart enough to make the metaverse like indistinguishable?
Functional?
Like, can we
Useful?
even do that? Yeah, like I like as humans we're so useless that I don't know if we can. So it's like I like some days it's usually if like I listen to Zuckerberg talk about it and I hear what his plans are, I'm like, oh my god, this is like the sky's falling. But then on the other end, I'm like, yeah, we can't even make eye contact in a Zoom call yet. So like I'm not too overly concerned. But
Yeah, I think the technology piece is an interesting one. I think without going down the rabbit hole too far, take 5G for an example. I would say the unfortunate thing, and you see a little bit of this happening in the US with actually evaluating how safe is this technology, right? Like if I'm not mistaken, the FDA is the one who sort of by proxy approved it, and so now that's being challenged. And this is where like some of the stuff had to be delayed, especially around airports. And I don't want to get into it too far, but my point is that like the reason why 5G is being pushed is because that's the expansion of the data threshold, like massively, right? We take to the next tier, and this might get into the weeds a little bit too much, but the reason I bring that up is I've wondered, and I brought this up on the show before regarding innovation and government subsidies. The way most government subsidies for innovation works is it incentivizes production, because you can't just research, you need to develop the product. And so what ends up happening, you use electric cars, we end up overproducing based on the sort of level of technology that exists today, right? So what I mean by that is like, if you look at today's electric cars, they don't really work great because we have a battery capacity issue. Well, how do we solve the battery capacity issue? It's not by producing more batteries. It's by spending more money in research and development. In research and innovation. And unfortunately, in order for firms to get the funds, they need to turn around and develop a product. Right? And so you've got this weird tie where developing a product before it's, I would use the term economically feasible, ends up with overproduction. And so my point is that we're sort of overspending on today's technology from a consumption perspective, such that I think we're potentially going to plateau a little bit until the innovation comes.
Yeah, like I think maybe that innovation is AI. Like essentially AI will start to fill the holes that we can't do. I mean, even you listen to guys like Elon and he's like, AI is a bigger threat to the world than nuclear warfare. And I mean, we're on that doorstep, and I still believe he's true, that he's right in some sense there.
Well, it's a reasonable hypothesis, right? Like unfortunately, the only way to validate the hypothesis is either experiencing it, right? Because I think it goes back to what does AI's capacity actually, right? Like there's a lot of theoretical capacity versus what we've achieved.
Yeah, and I mean, even the idea of what it can achieve, like right now, where Sam Harris was talking about this, the neuroscientist. He was talking about how AI at the moment in what MIT can do in 1 year, AI can process as much information as an MIT think tank of 5 people in 20. So like it's essentially 20 times more powerful. So like, it's like, 20,000 times more powerful. So it's like the growth that could be seen as soon as that switch is flicked on, if that the theories are correct, as soon as what's on the other end of that switch, I think we instantly change the whole shape of the world. Even on that aspect of like, okay, we have a data issue of how much we can push through, and that's what's holding back a lot of the VR and stuff like that right now. And it's like, well, if you can now do 20,000 years of research in the time it would, 20,000 years of research in 1 year it's time, then like, yeah, I don't know, then maybe all of a sudden those issues get solved a lot quicker than we think they are.
But to your point, that's innovation, right? More than anything, it's they're sort of holding back the development, if you want to call it that, because reasonable. There's some reasonable hesitation. But I want to transition slightly before we wrap up, because you've been you have a lot of talk about psychology and philosophy to some extent, and I'm wondering, is that the impetus behind the Sans cap standard? If I said that horrible,
Yeah, the Sanscape.
Sanscape standard. Yes, that's right. I knew that. So I'm just wondering, what was the impetus behind creating that? Obviously, it does, that page and that website doesn't have the following that you currently do in terms of your standalone. And I'm wondering, what's the plan there? What's the transition there? And my speculation would be that this is sort of you working, you're playing in the area of, politics is downstream from culture. And so you want to, like us, talk about the ideas that lead to the culture's positions.
Yeah. And that's, so I started a media company called the Sanscape Standard about, I think we launched 2 or 3 weeks ago now. And that was kind of the idea of being able to explore a little bit more abstract ideas that are outside of the realm of culture and politics, because that's the main issues that I follow with my personal account. And I was kind of like, okay, I want to give people a little bit more insight into the tools that I use to come to my conclusions on these kind of things. And then also the whole idea behind I've been a big fan of comic books. I think as much as people can criticize Marvel for kind of following a blueprint or whatever for each movie, it's like, yeah, that is kind of true as far as like the template of how each movie is played out. But even if you just think about the philosophical ideas that come through in those movies, like, even just, I look at it as like one big movie, and it's each movie itself is an episode essentially. And you look at people like Thor, and it's like, okay, Thor is a god that's constantly trying to prove he's worthy of his position. It's like we can learn a lot from that scale, even if, actually there's even a line in the first Thor movie that I'm like, that's fucking genius, where it's like he's talking to Jane Foster, the astrophysicist, and he's talking to her about the 9 realms of the cosmos, and she's talking about like magic, and she's like, oh, this is all magic, like where is this coming from? And he's like, I live in a place where magic and science is one and the same. And it's like, that to me, that's like such an insightful comment, because honestly, just anything that we can't understand from a scientific lens, we think of as magic. But like, even look back at like when Tesla was creating things, like people thought he was like, like they thought he was capable of like supernatural powers and stuff. So there's so many great ideas that we can learn in these hero narratives. And that's kind of one that I want to share to everybody too, is like even just the hero's story of the hero's journey of like the whole death and rebirth cycle, and all the adventure and all of this kind of stuff. Like
I loved Thor Ragnarok. There was a scene where he's like, oh, you're not your Thor, you're not the god of hammers, because he was looking for his hammer. He's like you're not the god of hammers. And I was like, yeah, that's right, you're not the god of hammers.
Yeah, exactly. And then, or even if you look at somebody like Tony Stark, it's like Tony Stark, this is maybe one that's like highly relevant to today's culture, but like the whole Tony Stark arc is literally in the first movie. He's insanely self-centered, he's egocentric as fuck, and by the end of it, he's one of the most selfless people on the planet. And it's like that journey and like that idea that you can pick up on through these essentially these archetypes, like that, those are invaluable. And these movies are littered with, even actually there's a good one in the first movie too, where the reporter starts asking him hard questions about his war manufacturing, and he was like, oh, all that sustainable green energy, like the food projects that we do, all of this, he's like, all of that comes from military funding, baby. And it's like, yeah, that's true. Like all progression that we make in real life comes from war. Like if you look at what war does, and we're heading into one of those right now, is like it crazily, like in a crazy sense, pushes forward the boundaries of technology and economies and stuff like that. Because actually they covered that in Eternals as well, the one god that's essentially in charge of the whole concept there is that there was gods coming to Earth and kind of pushing humanity along and helping them evolve. And the one god that was in charge of technology the other god was like questioning him on why he's building all these weapons and stuff, and he's like, because on the other end of these weapons comes medicine. And it's like, yeah, no, so it's like these concepts, these battles of like kind of, that's where you do look at it. Like, we all love to sit here and go like, oh, war is terrible, and yes, war is terrible, but it's also not that cut and dry. There's also all of these like aspects to just life in the world itself that I think are much better explored through these movies, because there's not like that emotional connection to real date issues. And that's kind of what I want to do with this page, is essentially continue on and kind of share the whole idea with like the sans cape standard is like the not, so sans cape being no cape, and then just like kind of the whole theory that not all heroes wear capes, and just kind of laying out that blueprint of like what that means in very similar fashion to Nietzsche's Übermensch, because that was what Nietzsche's answer was to a world without religion, was that we would all have to become our own gods essentially, and we would have to become, Übermensch just means Superman in German. So it's like, yeah, he was talking about how we all have to become Supermen in a world without religion, and it's like that's essentially what I want to push to, is that message, and start exploring a little bit more of that than just kind of like culture's fucked.
Yeah. Well, it's funny is, although, other end of the spectrum, there's a similar quote to some extent that like, the Constitution and this is from let's say the Christian perspective of the founders, the Constitution is insufficient if the morality of the people is not of a certain standard. And I think you can see that with, the discourse that goes on today, where, what did the Constitution really mean, with a motive of, well, how can we make it say what we want for our objectives?
Mm-hmm.
And so the reason I make that comment is because what you're seeing is that the morality of the people, this document only does so much to restrain. So it's a similar perspective, right? That the people themselves still have a level of responsibility. You still need, let's call it heroes, regardless of the moral standard, because I would argue, because politics in and of itself isn't going to save anyone.
Yeah, no, it causes more issues than it ever solves. That's for sure. And yeah, no, I totally agree that like we have to live. We can't just, is going back to the mandating morality, and two is like, you think about even a great Martin Luther King concept where it was like, one has a duty to not follow unjust laws. Or it was like, one has a moral obligation to not follow unjust laws, is something along those lines.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's so true. And that's like where, we need to kind of reestablish that politics should reflect culture. Politics shouldn't drive culture.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I would even push you a little bit on that, because if politics reflects culture, but you have an immoral culture, unfortunately the majority is going to rule the minority with tyranny.
Yeah, I just don't think you can also change culture in any way that isn't tyrannical with politics. So like it could fix it, but like in a long-term sense, it could redirect the ship, but you would have to undertake tyrannical means in the meantime. And I mean, that's what we're seeing on the other side, and they just have done a very good job of making it seem like it's all coming from compassion.
Well, and that what's crazy about that is like the history of these, tyrannical movements have a narrative of for the greater good, right? And I mean, we talked about this with Julie Ponesi a little bit, where so many things are claimed to be done in the name of the greater good without actually having a conversation about what's good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How have we? Yeah, that's a very good point. Is like, how do we even get to the destination if we haven't even talked about where we're going yet?
And it's just purely, for the greater good is this like mythical creature out there that we just reference for convincing or manipulating the people, as opposed to present as having a conversation about ideas to figure out what is good for the people.
Well, you could even bring that back to another religious sense too, where maybe there was a reason that they placed heaven on the other side of death, is so that we didn't try to bring around heaven in our lifetime. And essentially that's our idea with the utopia, is like in a world that doesn't believe in an afterlife and in say heaven or any sort of um, utopia that you could reach in another life, then it's like you're going to try to bring it about in this life. And anybody who has ever tried to bring about a utopia has always brought about hell. And so maybe that's kind of the thinking behind the religious sentiment of putting heaven kind of out of our reach.
Yes, I mean, I would assume, for us, we have a slightly different narrative, but if you took it as, heaven from a religious perspective as a whole,
I tend to think about religion in philosophical terms. I don't necessarily think about it in because I look back at even some Bible writings, and I'm like, oh, those are just like, you could literally swap these out for any Marcus Aurelius book, for any Nietzsche book, for any Jung, or any of these great philosophers throughout history. You could essentially, a lot of the sentiments are mirrored in the Bible. I think where we maybe went wrong in that sense was allowing people to interpret the Bible for us. But I mean, we're not in that day and age anymore. So like, even I can now read the Bible and not necessarily want to go to church, or not also, feel the need to confess my sins, but I can also look through it as like a philosophical lens, as being like, oh, maybe the people who created this, like, I don't necessarily believe that this was some, knowledge passed down from a deity to us, but I'm like, oh, maybe people created this philosophical system, which is religion, in whatever form it comes in, as, yeah, just kind of this idea of like, we can't do it ourselves, so we need to kind of put somebody a bit, like, I mean, it goes back to the big brother figure, where it's like, there's meaning outside of our lives that we can't understand. There's another life elsewhere. Just do the best you can with today in front of you. And I think that's kind of a message that gets lost on say the atheist crowd of
I would call them anti-theists, as I like.
Yeah. That kind of like, yeah, maybe we don't have all the answers. And I think that's where like faith has to come in some sort of concept. Like, I don't necessarily believe in a God in a typical sense, but I do maybe believe in a God as like, say, some energy source out in the
would you say agnostic is the right word?
Yeah, that would be, yeah, I guess I'd be agnostic, where it's kind of like, all right, I don't know what it is. I'm not closed off to any one idea, but I also am not latched on to anything. But I do think that like, as a society, we do need to turn back to spirituality in whatever sense that comes in, even if that's fucking taking 5 grams of mushrooms every Sunday. Like, we need to fucking
go on a spiritual journey.
yeah. Like, maybe you don't need to go to church, but like, maybe your spirituality is just getting blasted in your apartment. But like, I mean, that's mine. But like,
so, I was gonna say, I did see, I see a little bit of resemblance to what Jordan Peterson says about like, the story is conveying something about culture. Right. And I think you're drawing like, you have a similar commentary there with regards to the spiritual texts, that there is an underlying truth with regards to the humanity that we can still pull out of these texts, whether you believe them or not. And I would say, I think that's a fair contention that maybe Christians don't wrestle with enough, that for those that don't believe, there is room for this. Not to say that we would like acknowledge it as true or not, but to sort of see the perspective of how somebody might find value in a book that they don't necessarily consider be with the same level of authority that we do.
You mean in the sense of like being able to just kind of pick and choose ideas from the Bible rather than necessarily like taking it as the ultimate truth? Is that what you're?
I'm just saying, like, in a sense of, I would say Christians for the last 25 years haven't had the nuanced atheist perspective. They've dealt so much with the anti-theists. And so there's sort of a default to someone who's had a comment like you, without knowing, like, if you hadn't used the term, or if I hadn't given you the term, like, not being an anti-theist, there's this default to like, well, I have to protect my worldview, as opposed to engaging with someone who has a different worldview and just to understand, to see, and if you want to talk about it from a proselytizing perspective, you're not trying to necessarily convince them. You're conveying, well, here's why I see it this way. Here's why I have a higher regard for this, or because at the end of the day, we know as Christians, like, there's a level of faith that comes with saying, okay, this is the highest authority. We won't have absolute certainty until death, and we can confirm or deny. Now, I would say we can live with a level of certainty because it's just the way the human nature works to some extent. But I have other reasons why I would also say I live with certainty. But my point is that there's like, even just go back to the whole Republican Democrat thing, right? How much of that has been this weird twist with like religious and not religious? And I mean, there's obviously people on both sides, but you've got this weird sort of like battle for the correct worldview, as opposed to a little bit more, and I'm more sort of speaking about the American sort of Republican Christian view, as opposed to how do we cultivate a world that we're comfortable with the laws, but also respects the plurality of worldviews. And I think that happens on both, not just the Republican, it also happens in the Democrat super, progressive realm too.
Yeah, like I honestly just feel like we've reached so like I've started to, and this is something I've thought of recently, is like, cultures and civilizations are subject to evolution all the same as humans, and I feel like it's kind of this like swaying back and forth, and you know how there's that Darwin number of there's, I think it's like 150, you can have like 150 people in your psyche, like essentially have any sort of connection with or understand on a deeper level than just maybe like that's that person's name, but like actually keep present in your mind. And how once a community starts getting bigger than that is when things kind of start getting a little bit hairy, is because you can't keep track of everyone essentially and know how you feel about everyone. That's when you have to start kind of just trusting when you're strangers and all of that. And that's when you need laws in place, because you can no longer just have a town hall kind of discussion. Well, I think about that as very similar, and not just on like an individual level, but maybe on a societal level. Like there's maybe another number out there, I don't know what it is, where all of a sudden societies start becoming a little bit unproductive, and they can't actually communicate and keep track of even their own anymore, because it's just so large. And I think also there's more than enough history out there to suggest that there has been very advanced civilizations before us. And I think that maybe, civilizations, just like seasons, just like any ages, any of that stuff, it's a cycle. And I think we're kind of reaching this point where it's like, you can see it where every 4 to 8 years, it's like the culture, it's like it shifts back between like left and right, left and right, left and right. And it's like we're shifting more and more aggressively each time, where it's like, okay, they
less productive.
Yeah, it's like, okay, for these 8 years, they moved an inch further left than they moved 8 years before that. And then it's like, okay, we're going to like hardcore correct. And I mean, anybody who doesn't think that the left created Trump is like, I think they just lack any self introspection at that point to be like, oh, I created the culture for this guy to come around and pop off. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing, is maybe we're at this point where it's this cycle is just ramping up, and both, it's like a teeter-totter, and it's just more and more force every time that teeter-totter is getting pushed.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's fair. And it's sort of just a point of you said Darwin. I think it's Dunbar's number.
Oh, it's Dunbar?
Yeah, okay. I think it's Dunbar. But anyways, not a big deal. But I think it's a fair point that like the higher you go up in society, sort of, is there a scale at which 330 million people should not be ruled by one person?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, Joe Rogan always makes that comment, right? He's like, I know I'm not competent to make a decision for that many people. Like, how is anyone?
Well, even too, you think about like even take it outside of like one person. Think about even just the federal government. Like, how is the federal government supposed to legislate correctly for like over top of Alabama and California? You're like, even as just states, not even individuals, you just think about like what those states mean and in the industries around them. Like, you're like, how can you effectively legislate that? And I think that is where we both actually in America and Canada, I think we need to start approaching that and kind of go back to a little bit more of, hey, maybe we should be putting a little bit more of the power in deciding, the decision-making power back to the ground level. Like, let's have, again, it should be, the power structure should be families, communities, provinces, then federal, where it's
last resort.
It's like now, and now we've both, I mean, everywhere in the world has kind of flipped that, where it's like now all of a sudden all the power is at federal, then down to provincial, then down to community, then down to human. Like even you go to your average, MP in Canada and you talk about them on a local scale, it's like they can't actually fucking make any real change. Like it's impossible. So like, yeah, I think we're kind of at that point where we need to fundamentally reshift power, and that's where it was going. And I think with the technology and with like the decentralization of everything from media to currency, whether it's Bitcoin or anything of that, like it was starting to bring power back to the individual, but back to the family, back to the community. And I think we're seeing that right now, where it's kind of like a power grab as to like we're essentially in a war without knowing it, but we're a war against ourselves.
Yeah. No, that's good. Liam, we want to thank you for your insights on independent journalism, and I'm sure it's been helpful for our listeners. How can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram at liam.out.loud. Same on TikTok, and then the sonscapestandard.com is also my website, where I go a little bit deeper into some Instagram and all that is a little bit more just commentary and some shit posting and trolling, and then the website is where I go a little bit more into kind of the psychology and philosophy and culture and stuff like that.
I highly recommend the Isn't It Ironic videos on his Instagram page. They're quite good.
So that actually started as a concept of I wanted to start that as a George Orwell doublethink. That's how that concept came around. Was I was going to start doing a segment about George Orwell doublethink and just throwing ideas together that like two ideas that exist in reality but shouldn't. Like these two things cannot coexist. And that was the whole concept of George Orwell, is like Big Brother needed society to reach a point where two opposing truths can exist in reality. And so that was kind of like, okay, I'm going to do that. But then just the isn't it ironic aspect, I was like, oh, okay, I can just whatever. It's a little bit more light. It's a little bit more lighthearted than like, hey, this is spot on to a dystopian novel where the world essentially ended and everyone was depressed. And, yeah.
but essentially the same ideas, right? Same. Yeah. Like you're talking about the same things. You're just under a slightly less heavy spin, let's call it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate having me on there, boys. This was fun. It was good to have an actual chat outside of the DMs.
Yeah. No keyboard courage on this one.
Yeah.
But you heard me? Does that make sense?
Madden and Mitchell meet